Welcome to episode 2 of season 3 of the Filmmaker Film Watcher podcast. I'm filmmaker Richard Di Gregorio.
And I am film watcher Greg Ralph.
So this episode, we are delving into a confessions episode.
Yes.
Our Western confession episode.
Yes, and just being aware of the fact that some of our listeners might be driving at the moment, I'll just very quietly say Yee-Haw.
Over a whiskey.
Yes, we have got our whiskies here. Here's the sound effect.
There we go.
To put hairs in our chest, although we're more city slickers than true grits, so it's honey whiskey, but, that'll do. But to get a little bit of,
You didn't have to say it was honey whiskey. But anyway.
Well, this is pretty good. I'm really a non-drinker, so I'm doing well here.
So the first film we're going to look at this episode is John Ford's 1956 film, The Searchers.
And then 1969's Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid as our middle film. And then finally, Ricardo.
Finally, we're looking at the Sergio Leone Western, The Good, the Bad and the Ugly.
Is that a reference to us?
Just a little bit.
Okay. I'll fight you afterwards in that great
Which
Western
way?
style about who's which anyway.
That's right.
Now, Ricardo, you know that Westerns are not my genre, one of my non-genres, so I think you better get us going. So why don't you start us with The Searchers?
Okay, The Searchers. John Ford, renowned director of the classic films The Grapes of Wrath, Stagecoach, She Wore a Yellow Ribbon, and How Green Was My Valley, among many others, was at the helm of this revered 1956 film. The crux of the story is quite simple. Ethan Edwards, John Wayne, a very lonely character, returns home to Texas after the Civil War when members of his brother's family are killed by Comanches, Indians. In doing this, they also abduct Ethan's young niece, Debbie, Lana Wood. Ethan vows to track down Debbie, alive or dead, and bring her home. He does this, reluctantly, with the help of her adopted brother, Martin Pauly, Jeffrey Hunter. Together, they embark on a dangerous quest to find her, journeying deep into the heart of Comanche territory. What I find most interesting about this film is the character of Ethan Edwards. He's meant to be our hero, but he's such a tortured character that's full of hate. In one scene, he shoots the eyes of a dead Indian, saying if he ain't got no eyes, he can't enter the spirit land. He has to wander forever between the winds. He doesn't even want the dead to be in peace. Then, during the quest, when they find out that Debbie, now older and played by Lana's older sister Natalie Wood, is living with the Comanches, he wants to kill her, because to him it's better to be dead than live with them. Now this changes the dynamic of the film because you're never sure whether he's now trying to save her or kill her. It brings into play the saying, better dead than red. At the time this film was made, in the repression of the 1950s, there was a lot of change happening in America, and it's said that Ethan Edwards' obsessive and unpredictable character acts out the racism of the country at that time. The film is actually quite bleak. John Ford's direction shows the Outback's grand western vistas are composed beautifully, and the action set pieces are all still exciting to watch. Although I do feel that the performances in the film go from understated, John Wayne, to way over the top, Martin Pauly. I feel some performances at this time still had remnants of silent movie acting, and I feel that due to this, the film feels outdated. The audiences nowadays that are new to the film won't understand its themes. It can seem overlong and plotting, and I felt that John Wayne's character was hard to watch because he was so unlikable. Greg, what did you think about The Searchers?
Well, I would call his character, Ethan, both unlikable but also essentially unknowable. And you're right, he is quite a taciturn, bleak character.
Yeah, very.
And so you've got the Jeffrey Hunter character, Marty, almost making up or even at times overcompensating for that lack of dialogue.
Yeah.
And I have to say, when I first finished watching this film, I was going to give it quite a low score. But then I found myself coming back to it again in my mind repeatedly over the next 2 or 3 days. So I've marked it up because actually it's had an impact on me, and I think I'd like to go and watch it again. But I don't think he's unlikable so much as I found him morally repugnant.
Yeah.
And I couldn't work out, is this a commentary on the character? Like we're meant to criticise that attitude, or are we supposed to like it? And so, I did the good old Google thing to say, well, what's going on here? Because I don't know what John Ford's trying to do here.
Yeah.
And some of the commentary that I read was saying that at the time, people misunderstood the film. They thought they were supposed to basically root for the John Wayne character, whereas I found him quite distasteful, to the point that, and I've said this once or twice in the past, and I'm going to say it about another film today, if I hadn't, had to watch it for the podcast, I don't know that I would have persisted.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it gets overlong. I think it
is a long
and
film.
it is plotting.
Yeah. But I think that's deliberate to kind of give the sense of it's a long quest. It's very beautiful at times.
Oh, it is.
The use of, I think it was Monument Valley, the landscape, it's very archetypal Western.
It is.
But in a way that I think is archetypal to us now, but may not have been at the time. I can vaguely remember watching things on, Saturday afternoon TV and so on, where you'd have kind of rising mountains and very flat plains.
And some of those,
sweeping
shots, those sweeping shots as well over that valley was just
shots
beautiful.
On the snow, with the horses, for example. At times it really is quite a beautiful film.
It is.
And I think that stays with you as well. But, and you're right, it's quite clear he's racist. There's that line he says when he first meets a group of white women who have been rescued after being kidnapped themselves, and he's looking for his niece. He says, they ain't white anymore, they're Comanche. And basically, as you said, they're better off dead, which, as you said in your intro, spins the whole film from being rescued to hunting down. Yeah,
it's completely unpredictable when he finds her a second time what he's going to do.
Well, actually, I told my father-in-law, I made the mistake of telling my father-in-law the day before I watched the film, we're doing this podcast, we're talking about these films. And he said, yes, that's the one at the end where such and such happens, which in fact is diametrically opposite to what in fact happens. So I watched the whole film expecting one ending that didn't actually eventuate.
Sure.
But my biggest critique of this film, I think it's very ambiguous, and I don't know if that's deliberate or just wasn't very well done. But my biggest critique is that I don't think there's much character development here. I think the exception is Marty. He's, the good-looking boy. He's the pretty boy kind of character.
I found his performance way over the top.
At times, I did too.
And I found it so...
He was overacting.
Overacting all the time. But not just him. There was the Reverend as well. Who was just...
And I don't think I've seen a film with so many simpletons in the whole film. People who really weren't...
Hank Warden as Moose Harper, the lovable village idiot. What a weird character. Why is he there? What's the point of him?
I think he's there in the end to give them a mechanism to work out where Scar, the bad guy of the piece, the villain, the Indian, is to help them have a way to engineer that part of the plot. But you could certainly cut, these days, you could probably cut big swathes of the film out.
And then you've got the character of Laurie.
Vera Miles,
who's going to marry Charlie?
Yes.
What does she see in him? It's ridiculous.
Well, it's interesting. He was one of these, simpleton characters as well.
The only guy that's around.
But when he sings, the actor, it's like the actor is playing a part and then forgets to play the part while he's singing.
Yeah, that's true.
It was like an odd kind of moment.
It was, yeah.
There was so much in this film I just did not understand. I wrote down a list, okay?
Yeah, sure.
I didn't understand why the trader, Futterman, tried to kill him, the two of them. I think it was for the money, but that was really a bit vague. Why did Debbie change her mind about going home? Why did Ethan change his mind about her at one point?
Yes, well, that's true.
Why does Marty's mother come up because they realise they've seen her scalp and you almost heard nothing about her before and suddenly it's this big thing? Well, we've had no lead up to that.
Yeah.
And why did Sheriff Clay, who I think was the sheriff and the Reverend, drop the proposed arrest for Futterman's murder like it was a non-thing?
Yeah, that's right.
All these things where I just don't think there was enough attention paid to the logic of actions and character development. I do think the exception was Marty.
Yeah.
Jeffrey Hunter, who about, I think, 6 years later played Jesus in King of Kings. It was a very, very good-looking young man.
Was that?
Yeah.
Did he play Jesus in King of Kings?
He did.
Wow.
5 years later, 1961.
Wow. Because I really love King of Kings. I think it's a really good
I haven't seen it
film.
Since the 70s.
Well, I think it's a very good version of the Jesus story. That's bizarre.
But he was also
know that.
He's also one of the prettiest Jesuses on film.
Yeah.
Which is not a sentence I ever thought I'd be saying. But when his accidental Indian wife, who they name Look, they find her halfway through the film and she's being killed in a raid.
Yeah.
I thought he did own that moment, and I thought there was a bit more complexity to the character at that point.
Yeah, sure. Okay.
But yeah, there was so much in this, I just sort of thought, why is this happening?
As I said, I think the story is quite simple, but it's somewhat convoluted and all these little threads of story coming in and out and these characters, and I feel like those get muddled and too overlong.
I think a lot of the
drawn out.
I think a lot of the humour has dated. There's comic moments supposedly around the Vera Miles character and the backwards falling seat, perhaps a couple of times. But I did find there was a fight during the proposed wedding between Marty and Charlie. That was funny. I laughed during that. I enjoyed it.
But obviously, John Wayne and John Ford have a great relationship. Obviously, they were in. They did Stagecoach together. They did quite a few films together. They did Stagecoach, The Long Voyage Home. They were Expendable, Ford Apache and the Three Godfathers. She Wore a Yellow Ribbon, Rio Grande, The Quiet Man, The Searchers, The Wings of Eagles, The Horse Soldiers, The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance, and How the West Was Won.
So a couple of films.
Just a few films. Yeah, and also, like, John Wayne in this, like, he has a couple of really good lines, which I didn't really realise were, like, classic lines, like, that'll be the day. He says it quite a few times.
And at one stage, he actually says, that'll be the day when I die. And that actually inspired, because I thought, it's like Buddy Holly. And I found out, because I Googled again, I found out that, in fact, it inspired the song. So what happened was that Buddy Holly and his two mates who had a rockabilly band together went to see The Searchers and loved the film.
And I love that song. That's I had no idea it was a character.
They were sitting around one night, and Buddy Holly looked at his mate Jerry, and he said to him, it'd be nice if we could record a hit song. And Jerry said, in a John Wayne voice, that'll be the day. And that's where the song came from.
Wow, that's amazing. I had no idea. I've heard that song so many times. I love that song. Apparently on the set of Stagecoach, Ford said to Wayne, don't you know how to walk? You're as clumsy as a hippo. And stop slurring your dialogue and show some expression. You look like a poached egg.
Okay.
And apparently in private he said that John Wayne would be the biggest star ever because he's the perfect everyman.
Well, I will match your trivia with my trivia.
Sure,
Did you know that John Wayne's son is in the film?
What? Who's that?
Patrick Wayne plays Lieutenant Greenhill.
Really?
Towards the end of the film, who's the sort of young, out of his depth cavalryman.
Yes. Oh, is that really?
That's Patrick Wayne. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
A little bit of trivia.
Yeah.
I thought the opening of the film was very strong. And in fact, I thought the opening of two of these westerns were very strong. So you've got the scene of John Wayne's character riding towards the homestead from out of the plains.
And how beautifully shot is that from the interior? The interiors of the cabin, looking out over to the
silhouetted woman looking out.
It was beautifully done.
And the way that got returned to at the end of the film, when everyone goes inside the cabin except for John Wayne, who turns and walks away. He doesn't belong to the domestic front. That was very nicely done.
Oh, I think that was beautiful. It's a bit like a spirit floating in the wind. He doesn't know where he's going.
I think he's the vengeful spirit who cannot have a role in peacetime, and why he's been wandering for 8 years since. What did you think of the suggested relationship between him and the girl's mother, his sister-in-law? I think it was Martha. She was clearly in love with him. Did you notice that?
No, I didn't notice that.
Oh, absolutely.
Really?
She just kept looking at him like... not only was she the one, when she saw him, just who kept waiting for him to arrive, but when they take him to the house, she's always looking at him. She's a bit coquettish. She's trying.
Is this the one who...
The mother who dies.
Dies?
Yeah, at the start of the film.
Oh, right, okay.
And I thought, so is there an implication here that, in fact, Debbie might be his daughter? Is that why he's so obsessed about the whole thing?
Did not even get that.
So again, I had a look at Google to sort of say, am I the only person who thinks this kind of thing? And I found out, no, I'm not, which is the great thing about Google. You think you've got an original idea and you realise you just haven't. But that there are people who think, that maybe Debbie's his daughter. That's why he's so obsessed with this quest. Which, if that were true, would make it even more powerful. But he wants to kill her when he thinks that she's been somehow contaminated by living with the Indians. No, it's really clear that there's at least something from her side between the two of them.
I didn't get that.
I also found very foreboding and moving the whole attack sequence at the start of the film. I mean, you never actually see the attack as such, but you see as the family start to realise, the parents realise, and they're trying to not panic the children, but then have to make the eldest daughter aware.
That's right, and the eldest daughter comes in with the candle.
Yeah, and she's all la 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 la.
And realises what she's done and screams.
And they have to muffle her scream.
In this really... Oh, look, it was just really over the top bit where she just realises it's like very silent movie scream.
I have to say that didn't occur to me. I just thought...
Yeah, it occurred to me.
That was one of the most powerful sequences in the film for me, was that sense of developing foreboding.
I just think the film has dated quite a lot. And when you look at some of the other films which we're going to talk about tonight, which are only, 10 years older and whatnot, 10 years is a lot of time in film. Yeah.
Well, I also have to say that I think the film was let down by the casting of Scar. So Scar, who's not a cartoon lion from The Lion King, but is in fact the Comanche, or they kept calling Comanche, but Comanche warrior who has led the raid and killed the family and kidnapped the daughters. And
you didn't like Scar?
No, it was the casting. You've got this German-American actor who's playing the Indian chief. They had obviously cast a lot of Native American Indians as support characters. He looked so different to them. He looked like that archetypal character, in a World War II film. You have a Nazi captain just wearing different clothes of a very good tan. He just didn't work in the part. I mean, he was a fine actor. It was just wrong casting.
I didn't get that either.
But I like the fact that even though it was right towards the end of the film, they finally gave him motivation for the raid, because what was it all about? And then you find out that he'd lost 2 sons himself. So I thought at least there was a bit of motivation, whereas a lot of the time I felt that was missing, as I said before.
Now, what do you think of John Wayne? I'm not a massive fan of John Wayne, I must say.
Marion Morrison. It's
the real name of John Wayne.
I think his style of acting is far too stoic. I don't think he has a great range. I think he did very well. He cornered the market on a certain kind of character.
Yeah.
Even if he wasn't doing it in westerns, he was doing it in war films or, Brannigan, the cop on the street kind of thing. It's always the same kind of character. I think he was great for that kind of film, but I don't think there was a lot of development in that career, no.
So what are you going to give this, Greg?
Well, as I say, initially I would have given this, I think, a much lower score. And I have to say, for all these films, this is not my genre. So a film is going to have to work that much harder or do something interesting to get anything, halfway decent out of me. This really did stay in my mind, and just puzzling over the Ethan character and what was it really trying to say, as well as some of the sequences being, I thought, really quite good. So I'm going to give it a 7.
Okay.
I would have been probably a few points lower down, but on reflection, I think that's heading towards quite a good film, but it's not a great film for me. What about you?
Well, I think, say at the time, it probably would have been higher, but I'm giving it a 6 out of 10. I think it's very flawed. I think it has dated quite a bit. I still think if you're coming at it new, you're not going to really get the references. You're going to watch it as a film and not really get the complexities of the references back of the repression of the 1950s. I don't think you're going to get any of that, or a new audience won't get any of that. So when you're watching it as just a story, I think with these characters, I don't think it would hold up.
I would respect anyone for whom this is a beloved film. So I would
of course.
respect that feeling.
Oh, apparently Martin Scorsese is one of his favourite films, and he watches it every year or whatnot. Apparently he loves this film, and I can understand why you would at the time or find it amazing at the time it was released. But for now, because I had never seen it, so for now.
I think that's fair enough. I'm with you.
So the second film we're going to discuss tonight is Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. Greg, tell us about it.
Robert Leroy Parker, Butch, and Harry Longabaugh, Sundance, were real-life legends of the Old West in the 1890s. Their Wild Bunch gang pulled a series of bank and train robberies, led by Butch's brainwork and made successful by Sundance's sharpshooting skills. But their notoriety and continued successes led to their pursuit by an unstoppable super posse, so that they fled to South America to resume their careers. Like many other screenwriters before and since, including 3 major films in the late 60s, William Goldman was drawn to their story. He loved the fact that Butch and Sundance became even more legendary in South America, disproving the claim of his hero, novelist F. Scott Fitzgerald, who said that there are no second acts in American lives. Well, this 1969 film is presented as 2 acts, with a musical photographic interlude at intermission. In essence, it's a buddy movie, and much of the joy comes from the interplay between its 2 charming anti-heroes, Paul Newman and Robert Redford. Some gravitas comes from the more grounded figure of schoolteacher Etta Place, Catherine Ross, who is Sundance's girlfriend but also clearly in love with Butch. This film won Best Original Screenplay and Cinematography at the 1970 Oscars, although other westerns also did well that year, Midnight Cowboy and True Grit, another John Wayne film. And there's a lot to love in this film, which has a great pedigree. It's got a script by William Goldman, who also wrote The Princess Bride, and I'll say yet again, a personal favourite of mine that we must do one day, The Marathon Man, All the President's Men, Misery, and The Stepford Wives. It's directed by George Roy Hill, who also directed films of which I'm very fond. The Sting, with the same leads, Thoroughly Modern Millie, and The World According to Garp. It's got music by Hal David and Burt Bacharach, cameos by such stalwarts as Strother Martin, Kenneth Mars and Henry Jones as the bike salesman. And blink and you'll miss it, first early appearances by Cloris Leachman as Agnes the prostitute, Sam Elliott, who actually later married Catherine Ross, as the card player in one of the opening sequences, and Ted Cassidy, TV's Lurch from the Addams Family, as Harvey Logan, the leadership rival for the gang. So, Ricardo, that's more about, I guess, the where the film came from than what it's really about. But what did you think?
I thought I would like this a lot more than I did.
Snap.
I loved the opening, actually. I thought the opening was fantastic. Okay, the silent movie starts as a silent movie. I thought this is a real tribute to an old school
And I couldn't
Western.
work out, was that actually originally a silent... Is that something they've reused, or did they film it themselves?
No, I think they filmed it themselves.
I think they did, but I was prepared to believe otherwise.
Well, it looked great, right? And I thought, wow, that really sets the mood. Okay, we've got a real tribute to an old Western. And then, the opening cross-focus shot of Paul Newman's awesome. It starts in sepia tones and then moves to colour.
And whitens out.
Yep. That's right. So all that was fantastic. The cinematography of Conrad Hall, who did American Beauty, he's an amazing cinematographer, is amazing. I mean, I can see why he was nominated for an Oscar for it. He's an amazing cinematographer. I found all that great, and I thought it looked amazing. Paul Newman and Robert Redford, fantastic.
Paul Newman is exceptionally charming in this film.
Yeah, he is.
He really is.
He is. Robert Redford as well is so unreadable, okay? The scene where you think he's taking advantage of a lady and then it's revealed they're playing.
Yeah, his girlfriend. Yeah,
his girlfriend. Well, Redford's awesome. But then it follows with this weird, cheesy sequence where Butch looks to be wooing Sundance's lady with... raindrops keep falling on my head.
Well, this bit really stood out for me as well.
Yeah.
This is actually a sequence that a lot of people love in this film, and I find it really odd.
Oh, I find it cheesy, odd, overlong. The cow bit, I mean, it was just so cheesy. I thought, why are we doing this? I thought in the movie, is this going to lead to... Paul Newman is going to want her, and Redford and him are going to have a confrontation or a rivalry over her? No, never happens. But then this happens quite a lot through the film. You talked about the before the intermission, the snapshots, the photos, these sort of montage sequences. When they go to Bolivia, I just found them.
Well, there was a reason
overlong.
for the montage sequence.
Yeah,
they actually wanted to film them in 1890s New York, and they wanted to film them on the set of another film being made at that stage,
right,
which was Hello, Dolly.
Okay.
And they refused permission to do that. So that had been the plan. So they had to fall back on something. So with that knowledge, I don't mind that. But otherwise, I'm with you.
I just found it overlong. I found those bits are way overlong. I think they could have done it a lot shorter,
also
and we would have got the idea.
Raindrops Keep Falling on My Head is nothing like the 1890s.
Nothing.
Those of us here in Australia heard this song to death in the 70s by a local singer who then called John Farnham. It was his really big hit, and so I guess it's snap frozen in a moment of time for us for that reason. But it's a 60s, 70s song.
Yeah.
And then when you've got... there was another scene where they had Bolivian robberies and horse chases.
Yeah.
And meanwhile, the music's going... ba-da-da, like Partridge Family kind of stuff. And I'm thinking, this is just so wrong. Why isn't it 1890s music? Or why isn't it South American guitars and somethings? It was just completely out.
I felt... From the very beginning, we felt we were going to get this old school classic sort of homage to the Western in 1969.
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah.
It sort of had these odd moments of odd musicalities from the time. What is this trying to be? What are we trying to say with these characters? I know it's a classic, and I could see there was classic elements to it, but honestly... By the end and the shootout, I didn't feel that much for them.
If you take out the bike riding scene, I quite like the first half.
Yeah.
I think the first half works really well. It's quite a good story. These guys, it's a buddy movie, basically, and between two guys who have got, a chemistry. It's a film that, has them, good-naturedly pulling these robberies. There's the lovely sequences with the guard in the train who's got the safes. Woodcock, was it?
Yes, Woodcock.
Which I quite liked. You know, I thought that was.
So do I, but there's no gravity to the film.
But I don't mind that because at the same time, Sam Peckinpah was making the Wild Bunch.
Okay.
So they had to change the name of the gang in this film from the Wild Bunch to the Hole in the Wall gang because it was too close. And I've never seen the Peckinpah film, but if it's anything like his other films, it'd be quite a bloodied film. So this is going for something quite different. This is going for a light touch. So I don't mind that. I just felt like it fell apart in the second act. You know, Goldman, and that's why I mentioned in the intro, that, you know, Goldman was very drawn to this idea of Americans having a second act and actually being more successful in that second act, and yet that's where, for me, ironically, the film fell apart.
I think it fell apart completely in the second half, and by the time, you know, they're getting surrounded by
the police,
you know this is going to be their last hurrah. They're going to come out shooting and they're going to die, with a really cheesy still at the end. I just didn't feel much for the film. I didn't feel much. So even in the searches, I felt for the characters. I felt for a few of the characters, you know, and it was moving. And the beginning sequence,
the foreboding, yes,
the foreboding. I got all that, but this here didn't have. It was very shallow.
Yeah, but I don't mind. I don't mind the shallowness in the fact that it was trying to be charming. So you got some great lines written by Goldman.
Yeah, like, and the script was great, and the chemistry
and how they kept going. You know, who are those guys?
Yeah,
or the parts about, you know, where Butch Cassidy says, you know, I've got vision. Everyone else is wearing bifocals. Yeah, that made my wife laugh, and she's not a Western watcher.
Yeah.
You know? So it's got the charm. I think the bike scene overdoes it. That's where it kind of jumps the shark.
Oh, absolutely.
But I don't mind it being charming and slight if that's what it sets out to do. But
if that's
the story
all
meanders.
If that's all it's got going for it, though, Greg,
its biggest, I guess, storyline integrity was about the sustained chase by the super posse. There was the stuff leading up to that, which was fine. There was a bit about the rivalry in the gang that I kind of thought, well, this actually sticks out of the story. It doesn't really work because it doesn't really lead to anything other than they leave the gang behind.
Yeah, well, that's
much.
right.
And then they escaped to Bolivia, and there was some funny stuff about trying to learn Spanish while doing a bank robbery. I found that amusing.
Yeah, that was amusing. Yeah.
But the story itself has nowhere to go, and I really think the problem is with the script. The direction doesn't help. It is with the script, which is, I've got this really interesting story about these guys who do all this amazing stuff, and then they have to run away and do it elsewhere. And I think he was so engaged by the idea of that second act, but he didn't actually know what to do with it.
Yeah. I think the chemistry between Paul Newman and Robert Redford in those roles is fantastic.
It's his biggest selling point.
And they are wonderful. But
they also do that in The Sting as well,
exactly,
which I think is a much better film.
It doesn't make a movie. And I found myself bored. By the second half, I was actually quite bored. And I thought, well, how am I getting bored here? It was so disappointing because I really loved the opening. I thought, this is going to be great. I'm going to love this film. Because, you know, my father-in-law had said to me, oh, you're so lucky you haven't seen it. It's going to be an amazing movie. I just couldn't get there.
Yeah.
And I was really looking forward to it, so I was quite disappointed.
Look, I've been doing some reading around this because I do like William Goldman, if for no other reason than The Princess Bride, but I've also read one of his books, actually, and so I just want to know a bit more about what was going on around this film. So let me tell you, first of all, who got offered the part of Sundance before Robert Redford.
Yeah.
So initially, Jack Lemmon. So Jack Lemmon's production company had actually produced Cool Hand Luke, which is a big hit for Newman 2 years prior. But he turned down the role, partly because he thought he'd done that character too often before, and partly because he didn't like riding horses.
Well, you know what? Jack Lemmon would have been actually great. I love Jack Lemmon.
Yeah, so do I. Yeah. Steve McQueen. So apparently, according to William Goldman, McQueen and Newman both read the script at the same time and they both agreed to do the film, but then McQueen eventually backed out because he couldn't agree with Paul Newman, I think mostly about billing, who'd come first. And in fact, initially, the film was to be called The Sundance Kid and Butch Cassidy, because Newman was going to play Sundance against McQueen's Butch, but it didn't happen that way. And then finally, Warren Beatty. And Beatty didn't want to do it because he thought the film was too similar to Bonnie and Clyde, which he'd only just recently done, and that's fair enough.
Yeah, that's fair enough.
So that's the first bit of trivia. Trivia part 2.
Yeah.
William Goldman also wrote and produced 10 years later Butch and Sundance, The Early Days.
Oh, I knew that there was this movie, and I'd never seen it. I don't think I will see it, but who played...
William Catt played Sundance, and Tom Berenger played Butch.
Tom Berenger.
Now, they would have had a fairly good physical resemblance to the original characters, but I don't think it did very well. Surprise. Yeah. And number 3, and this is the one that really tickles my funny bone, I discovered that there was a Hanna-Barbera cartoon series in 1973-74 called Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kids. And it was about, and I quote, it was about a group of teenage spies masquerading as a rock and roll band, where I think the connection is really obvious. And what I particularly liked about it is that Frank Welker, who is well known to me as the voice of Scooby-Doo, voiced a character called Elvis. And if you can get Elvis and Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid into one TV cartoon series, I want to see it. Well, this was meant to be your confessional film.
Yeah.
And I realised I haven't seen this before. I'd seen scenes. So I'd seen the scene about, what are they going to do on the cliff top?
Yeah.
Are they going to jump or fight or whatever? Yeah. I had seen the freeze frame shot. I'd seen the bicycle sequence before.
Yeah.
And that's probably about it.
Yeah, right. Okay.
But I have to say, even though I preferred the first half of the film, it had a bit of a sensibility of being almost like a TV movie. In terms of execution or something. It felt a little flat or cheap or something.
Yeah. Well, what are you going to give it, Greg?
I'm going to give it a 6.
Yeah?
And that's really for the first half. If the second half had maintained the kind of the momentum of story and it had kept the charm up more consistently, then I think I would have given it a better mark. But to me, it was just really stark that the first half was quite good, I thought. It was entertaining, and then it just fell over.
Well, I'm doing that 50-50 thing. I'm giving it a 5 out of 10 on this one. I really loved the opening. I loved the first half, was really great, but then I just got bored and disinterested and I thought if the charm of the characters, which was great, and they are amazing. I love Redford in it. I think Redford was great in that time, and Newman is just always amazing, but didn't make a movie for me, so I'm going to give it 5.
So now, Ricardo, why don't you tell us about your filmed autobiography, The Good, the Bad and the Ugly?
Yeah, that's great. Directed by Sergio Leone, this 1966 film is the third film in what is now called the Dollars Trilogy, the first two films being A Fistful of Dollars and For a Few Dollars More. In the Southwest during the Civil War, the Good, referred to here as Blondie, Clint Eastwood, is a professional gunslinger trying to earn a few dollars by capturing criminals for the reward money, only to rescue them just as they're being hanged, then rescuing them again, and so on. One of these criminal outlaws is Mexican Tuco, Eli Waller, the Ugly. Blondie and Tuco work together for a short while, until Blondie calls an end to the partnership, leaving Tuco stranded in the desert without the money he is owed, and a furious Tuco survives this, finds Blondie and does the same to him, taking him captive and dragging him through the desert without any water, nearly killing Blondie. Then there's Angel Eyes, Lee Van Cleef, the bad, a hitman who always commits to a job and sees it through, as long as he's paid to do so. When Blondie and Tuco come across a horse carriage loaded with dead bodies, they soon learn from the only survivor, Bill Carson, that he and the others have buried $200,000 of gold in a cemetery. Bill Carson dies, with Tuco only finding out the name of the cemetery, while Blondie finds out the name on the grave. And they now must keep each other alive in order to find the gold. Angel Eyes, in search for Bill Carson, discovers that Tuco and Blondie met with Carson and knows that they know the location of the gold. All Angel Eyes needs is for the two of them to lead him to it. And this prompts an epic showdown between the good, the bad, and the ugly, where all battle it out to get their hands on $200,000 worth of gold. Now, this is quite a fun story that plays out between the three. Throughout this story, however, is the harsh and tragic the Civil War. Director Leone masterfully interweaves these elements, though not without the help of Ennio Morricone's iconic film score, which is quite possibly one of the greatest film scores ever. Sergio Leone stands amongst the greatest directors in cinema. When you watch a film of his, you know it's his. He's able to create a huge amount of tension with very little. His sweeping long takes with camera movement, detailed blocking and choreography, for example, characters walking into frame or extreme close-ups of characters' eyes, are just classic Leone. Kudos should also go, however, to the fantastic work of cinematographer Torino Delicoli and editors Eugenio Alabiso and Nino Baragli. Then there's the performances, which are all great, but Eli Waller steals the show as Tuco. He has such dimension He's not a nice character, yet you laugh with him and even feel for him when he gets into trouble. He's just so good. Leone also casts such amazing-looking faces in the minor roles, from people with disabilities to scarred faces. It's all just so well made. Look, this film deserves to be amongst the classics of cinema. It's an outright masterpiece. Greg.
Well, I'm going to try and predict your score now. I knew almost nothing about this film.
Wow.
I knew the music.
Yeah.
I knew the title. The title is often referenced and even parodied, in all sorts of places now, including kids' cartoons.
Yeah.
And I knew the music, although I disagree with you. I think it's an iconic tune, but I wouldn't call it a great soundtrack. I think it's overused, frankly.
No!
Well, I just thought, oh, here we go again. However, I'm not convinced that this is actually a Western. I suspect it uses the Western format. I'm wondering if it's actually an anti-war film.
I think
for three reasons.
Yeah, I can see what you mean by that.
Number one, just because of the content of the film itself. And in fact, I had a lot of problems at the start of the film. And if I hadn't, had to watch it for the podcast kind of thing, I don't know I would have persisted. It's one of those films that was always on Friday night on Channel 10 or something here in Melbourne on the TV. When it started, I thought, I think I know now why I've never watched it. But it really picked up for me. And it wasn't just the war stuff, but that really gave it a whole lot of content I wasn't expecting. So that was the first reason.
Yeah.
The second reason is Sergio Leone was born in 1929. So he would have been in his sort of prepubescent stage during World War II in Italy. And as we talked about in our season 1, I think it was, for The Bicycle Thief, where you saw, filmed in the real place at the real time, the kind of devastation that was wrought across that landscape. I would be surprised if he wasn't bringing a lot of that, of his childhood experiences to that film. And the third reason was that this was made in, was it 66?
66.
Or came out in 66.
Yeah.
So I seem to do a lot of Googling for this particular episode of our podcast, but I thought, okay, so when did the Vietnam War protests really start? And the first significant public protests were in 1965.
Right, wow.
So I suspect I could really easily over-egg this kind of theory, but I think this film was probably made when people were really beginning to question the Vietnam War as well. And in that way, I think it's of its time and ahead of such things as MASH, for example, that used the Korean War to critique the American government's role in Vietnam. I think this is doing exactly that with the American Civil War, much closer to their own home turf, obviously. So I really struggled with parts at the start.
Which parts were they?
Well, I found the cinematography at the start got really annoying. The whole switching. So there was the interesting first shot where you've got the landscape and the face kind of slides over from the side.
Yeah, beautiful.
Well, there was no meaning for why it slid from the side. I was kind of waiting for that to be explained. I think that was really just a technical thing to kind of have those two shots. Going from the wide shot to the absurd close-up, if you like, was almost priming us for what this film was going to be like. But then in that first sequence, for the ugly, which is introducing the Eli Wallach character, Tuco, I found the switching between long shot, close shot, even though the close shots were really quite interesting in their own right.
Yeah.
The way we're going switch, I thought, oh, God, if it's going to be like this all the way through, I don't know how long I can persist with this.
He builds suspense through that, really well.
Well,
and I love the eyes. The eyes are like the characters of themselves. The eye twitches, everything.
Yeah, but it was the switch that was really annoying me. But then what intrigued me was that what I thought I was watching was a duel between a guy and two guys, and suddenly you discover that they're not actually in opposition to each other. They are a team who's about to go into this bar in pursuit of someone else. I thought, okay, I've just had my expectations played with.
Yeah.
There's some playfulness here. That could be really quite good. And then we have the second sequence with the bad, which is the angelised character, Lee Van Cleef, where that was really well done. You had him riding up. It was like the beginning of The Searchers. You have him riding up across the landscape.
That's right.
Into the home with mum, dad and the kid. And you discover later on there's a teenage son as well. But and he comes into the home and mum and the kid are kind of shushed down the back while he sits down and eats a meal with the guy he's come to get one way or another. And they're eating together, and he's eating the soup and the bread, I think.
That's right.
They're eating.
Yes.
And when he first comes into their interior
There's
of their
hardly
home,
any dialogue in this opening.
I actually timed it because it so stood out. 10.5 minutes.
Yeah, there we go.
Which is longer than Butch Cassidy and Sundance Kid, which I think was about 9 minutes maybe.
Which is very similar to sort of another Leone classic, which is Once Upon a Time in the West, which is an amazing movie.
Well, this is the only
as
one
well.
of these films I've seen.
Okay.
But the interior of their home, and I noticed it again and again in different scenes, was really quite painterly. I sort of, perked up again for that sequence. Then the music, I just thought started to happen too often, so it started to lose me a bit. I thought, okay, we're going to play the music again. So I was a bit AC/DC about that sequence. I thought visually it was fantastic, and in terms of the drama, the suspense, but the music I thought let it down. And that scene played out, and that was fine. But I still thought I was watching a Western. Yeah. And I got a bit bored at times of the story about, okay, so it took a long time to get to the quest. Yeah. So a lot of interplay from the characters, and that was interesting to a point.
Well, I'll tell you.
But for me, it really took off when the quest started, and really when they started entering the world of the US Civil War. And that's when I just thought it really became a very good film.
Well, it became very epic.
Well, it's 3 hours long.
Yeah.
Folks, Ricardo made us watch the 3 hour version.
For this cut. I mean, look, I originally saw The Good, the Bad and the Ugly. I hadn't seen it, and I knew there was a few different cuts to this film. And, you probably thought it was overlong in some bits. Well, I think they added an extra 18 minutes into this film. So you might have liked the shorter version more than the longer version.
I've got the 2.5 hour version at home.
Okay. So I
would have cut out big chunks of the first half of the film.
I originally saw this at the Astor in 70mm. That's an Astor Cinema in Melbourne in 70mm. That's the first time I saw it, and I saw the 3 hour version.
And how old were you?
Oh, it was only 10 years ago. So it wasn't that long ago. And I just loved it. I just loved the film. So I like the 3 hour version. I think I don't get bored in it at all. In fact, I love the characterizations. I love Clint Eastwood and Tuco's partnership, and Lee Van Cleef. The performances are phenomenal. And that scene you were talking about with the angel eyes in the very first scene you see him be bad. I think Tarantino loves that scene also because it reminded me very much of the first sequence in Inglourious Bastards, which you probably haven't seen.
I haven't seen any of his films.
Yeah, there was a confession as well.
Depends on your definition of confession, but go on. There's
some great moments in there when Tuco's getting tortured, which is an amazing sequence.
Do you mean beaten up in the army barracks?
Yes.
Oh, I think so. And meanwhile, you've got a folk song.
A folk song being
spiritual
played.
being sung by a group outside who know what's going on inside.
Of course. But then you have the blue coat sitting there listening, and he says, "More feeling." And you've got the fiddle player crying because they know what's going on.
Yes.
Those sequences were quite powerful. And
I agree. But the bits you're referencing there, for me, were parts of the powerful second half. To me, the first half at times felt like a cartoon. Even when you had characters going, and even Lee Van Cleef at times, who has a face like a rat, frankly. He looks like the bad guy because he looks like a rat. It's all I've seen him in. I don't know if that's what he really looks like. It was makeup and the moustache or what. But it was a bit cartoonish for my tastes.
Which is fair to say because they are quite larger-than-life characters.
But it really picks up as it goes along. And so, there's the comic scene when Tuco tries to hang Blondie in the hotel room. Yeah. And I think that's the first moment in the film when the Civil War actually intrudes.
That's right.
Because he's rescued by the fact that a cannonball goes through the hotel room, basically. There's a comic scene also when Tuco goes to the gun shop and he's trying to put together the perfect gun, and slowly the shopkeeper realises that maybe he won't be paid for it.
That's right.
And it ends on a very good note. I won't spoil it.
Yeah.
And then you've got certainly the singing during Tuco's beating, but even just before that, when they're trying to work out if this group of soldiers coming towards them, a friend or foe, because they're wearing Confederate uniforms. They're Confederates. And they get close and you realise they're actually the Union. The Navy uniforms are covered in grey dust.
That's right.
I mean, it's very well done.
It is.
The scene where Tuco separates himself from somebody else where they're handcuffed together by using a train, and I'm not sure quite how they filmed that scene.
That was an amazing sequence.
It was. The scene where Tuco's having a bath and someone comes in to confront him, and I'd actually seen that scene in ads for when it was on TV, when he shoots him from out of the bath.
That is the funniest sequence, and he goes, because it's obviously the guy from the opening sequence who has been injured and lost his arm in that first sequence because he's been shot in that, and he says, "I've been practicing for a long time with shooting with my left hand," and then Tuco just shoots him out of the bath and goes, "If you're going to shoot, don't talk."
That's exactly right.
I remember being in the Astor, the first time I saw that, the audience were in fits of laughter. But that's Eli Waller. I find Eli Wallach in this.
I think this is his film.
It really
I
is.
expected this to be Eastwood's film, and it's not. He's fine. He's the iconic Eastwood kind of character.
He is, but
this is Eli Wallach's film.
He's the same in A Fistful of Dollars and For a Few Dollars More. Eastwood, he's the man with no name. So you expect that from Eastwood. But you're right, it is Eli Wallach's film.
And in fact, he's the only character who's really given a backstory.
Well, that's right.
You have no sense of who Blondie is. You don't really have a sense of who Angel Eyes is. I'm not even quite sure how he ended up being an officer in the Union Army.
Yeah.
It's not explained, and is he impersonating someone?
Yeah.
Has he always been that? Has he just taken up that role? It's not explained.
Yeah, I'll give you that.
And you've got no sense of who he is. But Eli Wallach, you get the part pretty much at the midpoint of the film where you find out that his brother is a monk. And you find out about how he's disappointed his family. You get to know him. You don't really get to know any other character in the film.
I think he's got so much dimension to him. And he's bad. But
no, he's ugly.
He's ugly. Yeah, that's right. He's ugly. But yet...
But then Clint Eastwood's character is not particularly good, actually.
No, he's not.
No.
He's not. He leaves him in the desert to begin with and says, see you later, I'm going to go, but our partnership's over. He's not amazing. But then at the very, okay... Well,
he's the closest thing to a hero in the film, but not really.
Yeah, but all leading towards an epic climax. I mean, it really is... You must admit, the climax of the movie... It does go for a long time. It's like 20 minutes.
No, I didn't mind that at all.
Yeah.
I mean, the first time you see Sad Hill Cemetery and you suddenly realise the size of the cemetery, which again is a comment on the Civil War and just the sheer numbers of dead.
Which isn't a real cemetery, by the way. It's not a real cemetery.
Oh, I assumed it wasn't. Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
But look, I didn't mind the last sequence at all. But that's when it went back to kind of the quest Western film, where it's been a big chunk of time really being, the anti-war film.
Yeah.
For me, it's a curious juxtaposition. If you stop and think about the timelines, well, the US Civil War was happening at the same time as the Old West. I mean, the Civil War was in the 1860s, I think. We know that Butch Cassidy and Sundance are 1890s.
Yeah.
The West is the latter half of the 19th century. So these things are happening at the same time. But I don't think of them as being the same time and place. And yet this film makes that very clear. And it moves fairly seamlessly between Western kind of thing. And so if the film had only been the quest ending up that scene in the graveyard, I don't know I would have liked it all that much. But I think the way, as I say, for me, the start was problematic. Let's say the first maybe third of the film. But then I really think it picked up.
Well, there's not a lot of dialogue in this film. There's not a lot.
No.
But when it does come, it's fantastic. I love Clint Eastwood when he's leaving Tuco, and then he says, such ingratitude for all the times I've saved your life. And then it's the good. It just classic. They're classic lines. They're awesome lines.
Well, if we look across these three films, and I don't want to say these are all representative of every kind of classic trope of westerns, but they do have things in common. So each of them has got somebody watching a distant figure riding up against the landscape. Each of them has got women looking out from the cabin as the riders approach, at least two, maybe three of them. In each of them, there are almost no women. So in The Searchers, you've got the women back at the homestead who get letters and play plot points, and even the woman who is the object of desire, the quest, if you like. But really, it's a film about men in the landscape, not just the main two, but a number of them. In Butch Cassidy and Sundance Kid, you've got the school teacher who comes and goes a bit, but I found her a bit of a passive character, actually.
Yeah.
And so it really is, again, about the men. You get women sort of popping up here and there, but not really any part of the story at its heart.
Yeah.
And again, in this film, occasionally, like there's a woman in a stagecoach that has a conversation briefly with Angel Eyes early on, but there really aren't women in these films. They really are men's world films.
Yeah, they are.
And I think, on reflection, that's one of the reasons that films like war films and westerns, by and large, I don't like them. There's two reasons. One is that they're often very violent worlds. Things are resolved through shooting, blowing things up, and I'm not interested by and large.
Sure.
But they're also very blokey kind of worlds. There aren't a lot of women in there, and I think that makes, for me, the stories usually less interesting. But here, I think it works.
Arch Stanton's grave at the very end of the film.
Yes. Which is kind of the MacGuffin, isn't it?
It is. Now, there's quite an interesting thing here, because apparently Leone couldn't get a good prop for the skeleton in the grave. So he couldn't find anything which looked remotely real.
Yep.
So set decorator Carlo Leva found a lady in Madrid, in Spain, who had a real skeleton for hire, and which was her mother's, who in life had been an actress.
Yeah.
And before she died, she said she wished that her skeleton should be used in the movie so that her acting career could continue after death. So they rented the skeleton, and it's her real skeleton you see in Arch Stanton's grave. I find that just fantastic.
Her name wasn't Arch Stanton, though, was it? No. Because I was kind of curious to know where the name comes from.
And when you look at that skeleton, it really looks quite awful, that skeleton, and so it's real.
Well,
you know?
I've got... let me match your trivia of my trivia. I hinted to you... Well, actually, I told you before we sat down that there's a connection between this film and The Godfather.
And my response was, I think Eli Waller was in Godfather 3. I think that was the only thing I could connect between the two.
Well, no. Apparently, Sergio Leone turned down offers to direct The Godfather. Can you imagine that film?
Leone turned down...
Leone was asked to direct The Godfather, and he turned it down.
That would have been a very different film.
It would have been a very different film.
But, you know, it would have been still very good, because Leone made Once Upon a Time in America.
Yep.
Which was his sort of opposite to Once Upon a Time in the West. And so he made a 4-hour gangster film, which I find is just an amazing movie. And
not seen it. Well, it's the first of his films I've seen.
Well, he does the gangster film so beautifully. Once Upon a Time in America, if you haven't seen it, is just a phenomenally beautiful film and very well made.
So this film, are you giving it a 10?
Well, first of all, I just want to say one more thing. I find that other films, like I know that so many people try and emulate the Western and try and do Leone shots in films.
So is that what we're drinking right now? Leone shots.
Well, yeah, exactly. Beautiful whiskey. I might have another sip soon. So Sam Raimi did The Quick and the Dead, and I know a lot of filmmakers try, and every time they try and emulate Leone, it looks cheesy. But even so, when you watch these films back when Leone does it, it doesn't look cheesy at all.
I don't think that this film is dated. I think it could easily have.
No, and the performances as well are very naturalistic in terms of For the Day. 10 years before you had The Searchers, which is very over the top and very silent movie acting in a lot of ways. I think the performances are...
well, maybe as it progresses, but as I say, I found the first part cartoony. So I'm back to my question. Are you giving us a 10?
Am I giving it a 10? No, I'm giving it a 2. No, of course I'm giving it a 10. Of course I'm giving it a 10 out of 10. I think it's a masterpiece. Masterpiece and one of my favourites.
Well, surprisingly, I'm giving it an 8.
Hey!
Now,
thank you.
I don't think you actually made the film. I thought that I would come to this podcast giving them all probably a 7.
Yeah.
And 7 is starting to feel to me a bit like a kind of a non-committal kind of score. And I don't think they're all the same. And that's why I've kind of parsed them out a bit. So for me, I think Butch Cassidy and Sundance Kid really suffers in the latter half, so that's why it's down to a 6. I think Searchers could be better, but there is something about it. But I think this one, to me, is the most interesting of the lot because it's not what I expected. I expected, in vague terms, the Western part of it, but the war part of it, that and how it was woven through, and as a product of its time, I find it more intriguing, and I might even enjoy it more on a second viewing, but it will be the 2.5-hour version.
Well, no, I think you should see the 3-hour version.
Oh, why?
Hang on a minute. At the Astor in 70mm. It's beautiful on the big screen.
All right, well, you book me.
So thanks for listening to our Western Confessional episode of the Filmmaker Film Watcher podcast.
Yippee-yi-yo-ki-yay, father.
What was that?
Confessions, father, you know.
Yeah, but yippee-yo-ko what?
Oh, that's a famous Swedish filmmaker of Westerns.
No idea what you're talking about.
That's all right, neither do I.
Yeah.
But it leads in well to our next topic.
Which is...
Well, we're going to look at films that have a bit of a surreal touch to it.
Yeah, that's right.
We're calling it our Surreally Strange Day episode.
That's right. Well, we're going to look at, again, 3 films.
We're going to start with 2014's The One I Love. Now, this is a film that Ricardo has not seen.
No.
Very good chance you, the listener, have never even heard of it. But it's one I saw a few years ago and really liked.
The second film we're going to talk about is Natural Born Killers, the Oliver Stone film from 1994.
Which will be completely new to me. And then finally, a film that we've both seen before, and a lot of people have seen, 2004's Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to revisiting that, actually.
We're going to have to give some thought to what we're going to drink, because we can't drink whiskey shots. We have to drink aardvark cupcakes or something.
Something like that, anyway. What did Dali drink? We'll go with that. But thank you for...
Dali daiquiris.
Dali daiquiris. Thanks for listening.
And adios, amigo.